Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Guilty, where we look at games, movies, or whatever else strikes our fancy, then decide, in our opinion, whether it's good, bad, or guilty pleasure. We're your hosts, Theron
and Kit.
We felt an interest in going back and playing some of the games on our PlayStation 2s recently, specifically
Onimusha Warlords. Onimusha was developed and published by Capcom on January 25th, 2001 for the PS2 and later an updated form of the game called Genma Onimusha for the Xbox in 2002, and finally a remastering of the game for the Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Steam in January 2019. Originally going to be on the PS1, but because the PS2 was almost here, they moved it to that. Doing so basically allowed it to become the first PS2 game to reach 1 million sales, and later 2 million worldwide, and is still held widely as one of the best titles on the system. My history for the game is I first saw it played at a friend's when it had been out for a little. I got my copy of the game when I got my PS2 in like the mid-PS3 life cycle. I want to say it was one of the first few PS2 games I had for it.
Personally, this was the very first game I ever played on a PlayStation. As a kid, that experience was essentially a quick little experience. Nightmares for about a week, and then once that was over with, way too much time trying to figure out the puzzles in it to actually beat it.
Flee while you can, you worthless bug! How could I die? By the hand of a human!
Visuals have some odd stuff going on. While having the general aspects between Japanese architecture and the fleshy demon type aesthetics, at times some of the fleshy demon aesthetics look like they have a bit of sci-fi scenery fused in as well. Even though not most of the scenery, such a thing seems to actually be apparent. Characters for the most part are detailed enough to make the point clear they're supposed to be humans, or demons, or what have you, and even today I don't really feel like the visuals have aged poorly.
For an 18-year-old game on the PS2, this game still holds up majorly in the graphics department, as each location looks wonderful and not out of place, like you would think for locations where demons have started taking over in some spots. It makes the location easy to tell where you are and have been, so when you need to back travel you can remember where that one door was, because it stood out.
Will save you.
Oh, you have come again. Hey, why don't you go to the Dark Realm? They say that it is possible to obtain strong weapons there. If you are interested, I hope...
This is an old story about a princess being kidnapped and her hero having to rescue her. Wait, that's Mario. Onimusha is the old story about a princess being kidnapped and her hero having to rescue her. Samanosuke is a samurai of the Akichi clan, who after getting a note from his cousin Princess Yuki that strange things have been happening, like the disappearance of her servants, he takes off to check it out along with a ninja guild called Kaede. Once the two arrive, they find the castle under attack by a force of Genma monsters, and Yuki being taken away. After failing to rescue her from a demon and getting knocked out, he's visited by the Oni, who gives Samanosuke the power to fight the monsters, and seal them away in the form of his new weapon, the Oni Gauntlet. That's basically it for the story. There's little bits and pieces, but the main thing is to run through the castle, defeat Genma, save Yuki, and stop Nobunaga and the demons from becoming all-powerful. It's a good thing there's such a small plot, because this game is really tiny. A normal run-through only takes a few hours, even if you don't know where you're going, but this doesn't mean it's a bad game or story. It sticks around as long as it needs, though that's a little of the bad as well, as some of the scenes feel like they were cut from the game to keep it short. Like there's one where Kaede finds Samanosuke after a previous scene of saying she needs to tell him something, and then doesn't at all when they meet.
Have to tell him.
There's also one where Samanosuke is talking to Yuki's adopted little brother, Yumimaru, about his world travels. It's neat to learn he's so worldly traveled, but why?
The story feels a little awkward to me. Not horrible, but a bit off with the pacing as well as the intent. A starting example I would point to is the fact a narrator pops up early in the game to notify you of semi-historical information.
I cannot believe you are here of all places. I am a servant of the Oda clan. My name is Tokichiro Kinoshita.
This man will eventually conquer the world under the name Hideyoshi Toyotomi.
But then seems to vanish until the end of the game without much explanation. I'd have liked if the narrator would have popped up more often to explain more semi-historical information through the game, though I admit there isn't exactly historical events they can explain involving demons drinking the blood out of princess skulls. As for pacing, an oddity to it is, after successfully capturing Yumemaru, they lock him in a room for, I'm guessing, later use, but they already know someone is there to attempt to rescue him. Once Yumemaru is rescued, the demons then I guess decide to set up an elaborate event in which one of them poses as a maid and another essentially copies Samanosuke's look, then attempts to lead Samanosuke away so he is gone before punching Kaede in the stomach and taking off with Yumemaru to... Well, then the demon waits for Samanosuke to arrive to open the entrance to Demon World. No, really, how dumb were some of these demons that they thought standing around waiting for their opponent to appear before running off is a smart idea. To add to this, the same demon that kidnapped Yumemaru and waited on Samanosuke before the entrance to the demonic realm opened later reappears to attempt to kill Samanosuke. I mean, she doesn't hint at the way through the door being in that location or anything. She just seems to reappear going, "Aha! I knew you'd show up!" as though this has happened before. These oddities aside, the story isn't overly convoluted, even if some story points come off obviously as means to progress the plot, rather than seeming like natural progression. Gameplay for Onimusha Warlords is a mixed bag with a bit more detail than it seems at times. The game will often have progression limited by puzzles put in front of the player, with combat sprinkled in as a means of making the gameplay more interesting than simply moving between puzzles. Movement is the good old tank controls setup, where pushing forward on the D-pad sends the player whatever direction they're looking rather than however forward is oriented to the camera. This can be a good or a bad thing with the game. With stationary cameras throughout the game, this system helps with movement as it makes it easier to transition from one camera to the next, though that is somewhat where the biggest benefit to the controls comes in. As with tank controls in most every other aspect, they're slow, clunky, and will often walk the player into walls. A benefit to this, though, is the combat in the game can be changed based on certain chosen movements. You have a button to help with reducing the tank controls, which allows you to target enemies, usually whichever enemy is closest to you, though sometimes it doesn't like the enemy in front of you, so it'll instead choose to target some arbitrary enemy who isn't really a threat. Most of the time, though, it targets the enemy closest to you. This aim system helps combat a bit, allowing you to attack enemies in different manners. Pressing forward while attacking can lead to a stab, which can knock some enemies down. Backing up and attacking can often lead to a kick, which might throw enemies away from you. As well, the player picks up multiple weapons, which thanks to the system, each one has their own combat style and benefits, which is nice because a player might prefer a specific combat style rather than the one given by a different weapon. What isn't so nice is that each weapon is needed to open different color-coded doors that are locked shut. Now, to start off, I will state I have no problems with color-coded locks or similar. This is more a complaint about how it is done here. When you get a new sword, it can unlock doors of a similar color to them. If you get to a door for a color you have, but you don't have it equipped, it just tells you to equip the other weapon with the corresponding color. This doesn't seem like much, but an optional weapon given under specific circumstances later on can open all the color-coded doors without the need to swap in the slightest, showing that they could have made this system less tedious, yet for some reason didn't. For other interesting mechanics the game includes, we also have deadlocking, in which the player and the enemy may sometimes lock swords and struggle for who powers through. In Onimusha, this mechanic requires you to, essentially, spam buttons all over your controller like you're having a stroke in an attempt to power through. Kind of odd, but I guess it makes a little sense. There's absolutely no in-game control indicator I could find to explain this. Another interesting mechanic is one that is most likely never going to be seen by most normal people playing the game. The player can cut arrows out of the air. When an archer shoots at the player, if he blocks it, it just dings off the sword and nothing special. If the player takes a risk and tries cutting the arrow out of the air and succeeds, the arrow becomes a soul to be picked up. It's mostly useless, but kind of neat. Next on the agenda is the puzzles. Now, I admit these puzzles have gotten a lot easier, well, all except one, since I grew up, but they're still varied enough to not feel like a chore replaying the game. In fact, I would almost argue they are one of the benefits to the game. While the majority of the puzzles for the game are simply go to this location and use this item, there are some different puzzles as well, such as puzzle boxes, which are often necessary to complete a different task. With puzzle boxes, the player will have to slide numbers around to get them oriented in the proper area. Mostly simple puzzles, but some of them can get a little tricky. A segment of the game requires solving a few quick puzzles, of which screwing up on said puzzles is instant death, which kind of sucks, though most are easy to figure out with the exception of a sliding puzzle. Maybe I just suck at it, but it seems like no matter how many times I practice it, the puzzle gets me in almost every playthrough at least once. Last but not least, like quite a few games of the time, Onimusha includes rewards for beating the game specific ways, such as collecting enough little stones or getting a high enough rank. The thing is, none of these are worth it. Going through the effort to unlock Ultimate Mode, I kind of expected a more difficult mode. What I got instead was a lot of work for a new Easy Mode. Ultimate Mode unlocks the strongest weapon in the game from the start for the player, gives unlimited ammo for guns and bows, as well as infinite magic when using any of the other weapons, plus 99 soul absorbers. Sounds really nice, and I can see the appeal. The problem is, to unlock Ultimate Mode, you have to collect an annoying amount of the odd little stones called fluorite. Then you have to beat the game to unlock a challenge mode where you break vases. Then you have to break all the vases on a time limit. Then you unlock the mode. It's a little annoying, and I'm sure that sounds like a tiny bit of effort, all things considered. The thing is, it's just Easy Mode. The player goes through all that to essentially play the same game they already played, except with everything but invincibility turned on. I mean, you die like 10 times in a row and the game unlocks an easy mode for you to play already. It just feels like a lot of work for essentially an easier way to play the game. It'd be like winning the Olympics to be allowed to race against kindergarten kids in a sack race.
Okay, movement. There's tank controls, which isn't too bad, except when you're grinding your face against the wall trying to turn because you're used to more fluid controls, or the whole stop, turn, go, stop, turn, go, which, yeah, can kind of break the flow just a bit. One thing that helps for the movement is the ability to strafe around an enemy, but it's also not needed as you can basically tank and guard against everything that comes at you. Except when you can't. While movement is clunky, the weapons are not as much. What I'm getting at here is a little into the game you get the 3 elemental blades. A lightning sword to replace your normal, that you might as well have just chucked away as you will never be using it again after the first 12 or so enemies. A fire sword, which is just a bit thicker and slower than lightning, but hits harder. And a gale blade, which is basically the most varied blade weapon of the 3. Each can unleash an elemental attack, be it striking with lightning, throwing fire, or wind to slice them up. They all have their uses in combat, as one can stun lock, one can clear a room, and the other can set a few on fire, depending if you don't aim the wrong direction because of the fixed camera messing with your aim and lock on. I just wish they were more varied than a sword, bigger sword, and a double-bladed sword. The demons of the game all look really neat and only 2 get a recolor, but they also change up their moves to a degree, so it's not a true recolor. Another neat thing is each demon has its own counter. How? Basically, it will be luck until you understand not only do you have to hit or guard at the right time, or kick them at the right time, but be using the right blade to add a little more complexity and usefulness to the weapons. I was able to learn a few of them over playing, but unless you really bother and want to learn, it isn't too needed to fight them other than to make fights a lot easier. Though it is sweet when you counter a demon to kill it. The puzzles aren't cheap, thankfully. There's just barely any of them, which is understandable with how small the game is. There is a room with an X and plus floor that kills whoever's on an adjacent panel, the timed water sliding block puzzle, the sliding locks of getting a few numbers in a row to unlock and get items you need, which you use to solve a use item on the very obvious thing puzzle, and the word boxes, where you need to find the right scrolls to learn what a word means to solve it. There's only a few of each type, as the game is more based around combat than solving puzzles this time around. The last thing I want to talk about is the Dark Realm. This is an area of 20 floors with all the demons you fought in the game, minus the bosses of course. This is a major test of skill, as you have to manage your health, items, and magic you picked up over the game if you choose to go in and reach the final floor. Which if you do, it gives you an ocarina to open a door to the best weapon of the game, the Bishamon sword. Or you get to use it on like 4 enemies and the final boss to make a major joke. Unless you collect 20 green rocks and explore everything before it, then the whole game becomes a joke on New Game Plus. While I may have sounded a little like I hated it for gameplay, but don't get me wrong. I love this game majorly, as at least once a year I will beat this game and sometimes the other 2 after it. But as you can definitely tell, this game was a see if it would work. Which of course it majorly does.
The game is still really good, though the rewards for it kinda suck. The game is still enjoyable and at times can still be difficult. One thing I find funny is how often the length of a game is seen as a benefit. The longer a game is, the better. But some of this game's rewards at the end of it actually rely on you finishing the game faster, almost as though it wanted to encourage speedrunning. The internet can be disappointing. Rule 34 dictates if something exists, there is porn of it. Well, internet, where's the Fortinbras porn? This character seems to be shockingly overlooked by the internet. With all the weird crap that gets porn of it, apparently Onimusha's Demon King is too weird for the internet.